Most people want transformation. They want change. They want something different tomorrow than what they're experiencing today. But the truth is, most people start in the wrong place. They start with what they want to do, or how they want to do it. How they want to do it. They rarely stop to ask a far more important question. Why do they want it in the first place? We live in a world obsessed with tactics. Give me the steps. Show me the strategy. Teach me the trick. But information isn't the problem. There's no shortage of hacks or systems. What's missing is alignment. When your actions aren't grounded in something meaningful, something deeply personal, they burn out. They become unsustainable. You fall off track, and you blame discipline when really you never clarified purpose. Purpose is the foundation. It's the engine, the fuel. It's not about motivation. It's about direction. Motivation fades, direction endures. A clearer why gives you something to return to when things get messy, when you're tired, when you fail. Because let's be honest, you will fail. Everyone does. But people with a why, they get back up faster. They know what they're getting up for. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to have an unfair advantage? Not in talent, not in resources, but in resolve. They just keep showing up. They don't always look the strongest, but they outlast everyone. It's not magic. It's not mindset. It's meaning. They have something in their lives that matters enough to keep going when the novelty wears off. You don't need a grand life mission to begin. This isn't about writing a purpose statement and hanging it on your wall. Purpose is rarely loud. In fact, it's often quiet. It whispers. It shows up in moments when you feel connected, when you feel alive, when you do something and think, this matters. Those are the clues. Pay attention to those. Purpose doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for attention. It's a compass, not a stopwatch. It won't always tell you how fast you're moving, but it will always tell you if you're moving in the right direction. That's the power of starting with why. Without it, habits are empty rituals. With it, habits become acts of intention. And here's the thing about transformation. It doesn't begin the moment you act. It begins the moment you understand. The moment something clicks inside you and shifts how you see the world. Let's shift. That internal spark is purpose revealing itself. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. You'll start to recognize which parts of your life are built around it, and which parts are just noise. So before we talk about what to do or how to change, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, why do I want this? Not what people expect from you. Not what you think success should look like. What actually matters to you? That question, asked honestly, is where real transformation begins. We often think of progress as motion, more action, more hustle, more hours. But not all movement is progress. Sometimes the most powerful step forward looks like standing still. Not out of laziness. Not out of fear, but out of intention. Because stillness is where clarity begins. It's the habit of stepping back so you can see what you're really doing and why it matters. Intentional stillness isn't about zoning out. It's not mindless rest or scrolling through your phone in bed. It's deliberate. It's 10 minutes at the end of the day where you disconnect from the noise and reconnect with yourself. Where you ask, what did I learn today? What did I ignore? What am I becoming? Those aren't small questions. They shape everything. This isn't some ancient ritual reserved for monks and philosophers. It's available to all of us right now. But most people avoid it. Not because they don't have time, but because silence feels uncomfortable. Sitting with your thoughts feels vulnerable. Go, ooh. Reflection forces you to confront things you've been avoiding. And yet, that's exactly why it's so powerful. Stillness slows down the world long enough for your values to catch up with your behavior. Without it, we're just reacting, checking boxes, chasing goals, living on autopilot. But when you pause, when you reflect, you notice patterns. You notice how you speak to people, how you spend your time. What drains you, what lights you up. And in that noticing, you begin to reclaim choice. Think about how much of your life is spent responding to urgency, emails, notifications, deadlines. It's all loud. Reflection is the opposite. It's quiet. It's quiet. It doesn't demand your attention. You have to choose to give it. And that choice, repeated daily, is what rewires your relationship with time. You stop chasing everything and start focusing on what matters. Over time, this habit becomes more than a pause. It becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, you start to see yourself more clearly. Not the curated version. Not the version others expect. The real version. The one who is growing. The one who is learning. The one who is trying. Stillness makes space for honesty, and honesty is the foundation of any kind of meaningful change. There's also something humbling about reflection. You start to see where you've fallen short, but also where you've shown up with strength. You become a little more gracious with yourself and a little more responsible for your choices. You can't lie to yourself when you're sitting in silence. That's what makes it uncomfortable. That's what makes it transformational. What makes this habit so deceptively powerful is that it doesn't look impressive. No one will congratulate you for doing it. There's no applause, no metrics. But it's the quiet work behind the scenes that shapes every decision you make in public. 10 minutes a day isn't about slowing down your progress. It's about making sure you're actually going in the right direction. There's a cultural bias toward movement. We celebrate the grind, the hustle, the non-stop pace. Productivity is worn like a badge of honor. In that environment, stillness can look suspicious. If you pause, if you rest, if you step back to think, you must be falling behind. But what if stillness isn't the absence of action, but the presence of intention? Stillness isn't what happens when you've run out of things to do. It's what happens when you choose to stop doing for a moment so you can start seeing. Seeing clearly. Seeing fully. It's not about doing less. It's about doing better. Anyone can run fast, but only a few stop long enough to ask, am I running in the right direction? When leaders make great decisions, they aren't reacting. They're responding. That's a crucial distinction. Reaction is impulsive. Response is thoughtful. Stillness is the space in between stimulus and response. It's where clarity lives. It's where values speak louder than fear. It's where strategy begins to form. The most effective people aren't constantly in motion. They're constantly in awareness. They know that activity isn't the same as achievement. They understand that every yes is also a no to something else. So they use stillness as a filter. Not everything that's urgent is important. Not everything that's loud deserves your energy. In high-pressure environments, the instinct is to move faster. But speed doesn't fix confusion. It just multiplies it. Stillness, on the other hand, creates space for alignment. It lets you look beyond the surface. You start noticing things that were invisible at full speed. Missteps, opportunities, patterns, blind spots. You can't course correct if you don't stop to check the map. There's a reason some of the most powerful people schedule time to think. They treat stillness like a discipline, like a meeting with their future self. It's not optional, it's essential. Because the bigger the responsibility, the more dangerous it becomes to operate without reflection. When you move without pausing, you risk moving further away from what matters. Stillness is also a test. It reveals how comfortable you are with not performing. Can you sit in silence without reaching for your phone? Can you go an hour without needing to feel busy? The discomfort of stillness is often just the withdrawal from noise. And once you get past that discomfort, you find something deeper. Focus, calm, direction. In a world addicted to urgency, stillness becomes a strategy. Not to fall behind, but to stay ahead. It's the move behind the move, the invisible preparation that makes visible impact. It's not weakness. It's not idleness. It's the kind of strength that doesn't shout, but shapes everything around it. The brain is not designed to process endless noise. It's a brilliant machine, but it has limits. When we're constantly surrounded by stimulation, notifications, conversations, deadlines, background noise, we stop thinking and start reacting. The mind becomes cluttered, and clarity becomes almost impossible. Silence isn't a luxury. It's a requirement for clear thought. When the external world is loud, the internal world becomes chaotic. You might not feel it at first. It creeps in slowly. You forget small things. You lose your focus. Your decisions feel rushed. You start confusing urgency with importance. And the scariest part? You start calling that state of mind a normal. You adapt to the noise, but the cost is depth. Real thinking takes space. The kind of space where ideas aren't competing with distractions. Where your thoughts can stretch out, connect, and settle. Some of your best ideas don't come when you're trying to force them. They come when your brain is quiet enough to receive them. That's why solutions often appear in the shower, on a walk, or in the middle of silence. The brain finally has room to breathe. We've glorified multitasking, but the truth is, it fractures your attention. And fractured attention leads to fractured insight. You might get through your to-do list, but you're not accessing the deeper layers of thought, the kind that lead to real innovation, better judgment, stronger intuition, and stronger intuition. That kind of thinking isn't loud. It doesn't compete. It waits for silence. Silence also allows the brain to clean itself up, literally. There's neurological evidence that in silence, the brain activates default mode networks that help consolidate memory, make sense of experiences, and restore cognitive energy. It's not just mental, it's physical. Your brain heals in silence. And when it heals, it performs better. We've created environments where silence is rare. Open offices, constant connectivity, the pressure to always be available. But just because silence isn't common doesn't mean it isn't critical. In fact, the less silence we have, the more distorted our thinking becomes. We start reacting based on emotion, pressure, and noise, not on wisdom. You can train your brain to find clarity again, but it won't happen in the middle of chaos. It starts with giving it moments of stillness, not for hours. Sometimes just a few intentional minutes where there's no input, no stimulation, no performance. In that space, the brain stops scanning for what's next and starts listening to what's present. Silence isn't emptiness. It's clarity waiting to be heard. Your best thoughts are already in you. Your next breakthrough, your clearest insight, your truest instinct, they're buried under noise. The brain doesn't need more information. It needs more room to process what it already knows. And that room begins with silence. We tend to think big changes require big moves. That's the story we're sold. Overnight success, radical transformation, dramatic breakthroughs. But most of the time, the real shifts happen in the small spaces. The quiet, repeated decisions that seem almost too ordinary to matter. The things you do daily without applause, without attention, without urgency. Small habits are easy to dismiss because they don't create instant results. You don't feel a dramatic difference after one day of journaling, one mindful pause, one healthy meal, or one early bedtime. But that's exactly what makes them powerful. They slip under the radar. They're sustainable because they don't rely on motivation. They rely on motivation. They rely on rhythm. Big goals often overwhelm us because they live in the future. They feel distant and uncertain. Small habits live in the present. They're concrete, actionable, and completely within your control. You can't always control outcomes, but you can control whether you sit down for 5 minutes and reflect. Whether you show up when it's uncomfortable, whether you keep the promise you made to yourself, even when no one's watching. The compound effect of small habits is where the magic happens. One positive action doesn't change your life, but repeated, it creates identity. When you do something consistently, you start to see yourself differently. You're no longer someone who tries to be intentional. You're someone who is intentional. You're someone who is intentional. That shift in identity is what fuels lasting transformation. What's often misunderstood is that discipline isn't about intensity, it's about consistency. It's better to do something meaningful for 5 minutes every day than to burn yourself out with a perfect routine you can't sustain. Small habits lower the barrier to entry. They build trust. They tell your brain, this is who we are now, and the brain begins to believe it. There's a deep confidence that grows when you keep small promises to yourself. Not because they're impressive, but because they're kept. You begin to realize that transformation doesn't require you to overhaul your life. It requires you to stay with something long enough to let it work. It's the practice, not the performance, that creates real change. Small habits also create momentum. When you win one small moment, you're more likely to win the next. One good choice leads to another. One shift in mindset opens the door to a different way of living. It's not about the size of the habit. It's about the direction it moves you in. Over time, those tiny course corrections add up to a completely different destination. We underestimate the power of what feels ordinary. But the people who change their lives aren't doing extraordinary things occasionally. They're doing simple things consistently. The kind of habits that don't just change outcomes. They change who you become in the process. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical work. It comes from mental scattering. Always thinking, always switching, always rushing. You wake up already behind. You go to sleep still catching up. Every day becomes a blur of doing, and somehow nothing feels truly done. This isn't a time management issue. It's an attention problem. Frantic is the default mode for many people. It's fast, reactive, noisy. It makes you feel like you're accomplishing something because you're always moving. But movement isn't momentum. Noise isn't clarity. And being busy is not the same as being effective. Focused people operate on a different wavelength. They're not faster. They're quieter inside. The shift from frantic to focused doesn't happen by doing more. It happens by doing less on purpose. It starts when you stop asking, what else can I add? And start asking, what actually matters? That's a very different filter. Focus requires subtraction. It's not about squeezing more into your day. It's about removing what dilutes your presence. When you're focused, you're not just managing time, you're managing energy. Energy. You stop pouring your attention into everything that asks for it and start investing it where it has meaning. The inbox might still be full. The calendar might still be packed. But your mind is no longer scattered. You're anchored. Here. There's a quiet knowing about what needs your presence and what doesn't. Frantic living pulls you in 1,000 directions. Focused living pulls you deeper into one. That's where depth comes from. Not from doing more, but from doing something fully. When you're present, even simple tasks take on a different quality. You write with more clarity. You speak with more intention. You listen with more patience. Everything sharpens. Everything sharpens. The world rewards urgency, but the best work, your most important thoughts, your clearest insights, require space. Focus is the discipline of protecting that space, of saying no to the good so you can say yes to the essential, of slowing down your pace so you can strengthen your direction. Make a direction. It's not about perfection, it's about alignment. Getting there requires friction. You'll feel uncomfortable saying no. You'll worry you're missing out. You'll be tempted to go back to the rush because it feels productive. But there's a deeper satisfaction that comes when your actions match your priorities. That's the heart of focus. Not control, but clarity. You don't have to escape your life to find focus. You just have to return to it differently, with presence, with boundaries. With enough stillness to ask, is what I'm doing today moving me toward who I want to become? Now, that question alone can quiet the frantic and call forward the focused. Most people think habits are just about results. Exercise for fitness, reading for knowledge, meditation for calm. Meditation for calm. But beneath the surface, habits do something far more powerful. They reveal. Every habit, especially the quiet ones done in solitude, becomes a kind of mirror. Not one that reflects how you look, but who you're becoming. When you practice a habit like intentional stillness or daily reflection, you start noticing more than just external outcomes. You begin to observe yourself, your patterns, your reactions, your rationalizations. You see how you respond when things don't go your way. How you show up when no one is watching. What you avoid. What you chase. The habit holds it all up to the light. This mirror isn't always flattering. Sometimes it shows discomfort, resistance, excuses. And that's exactly why it's valuable. Because transformation doesn't come from pretending. It comes from seeing. You can't change what you refuse to look at. Habits that ask for honesty, even just for 10 minutes a day, are some of the most courageous work you can do. Most of the time, we're too close to our own behavior to recognize its impact. We tell ourselves stories that help us feel okay in the moment, but those stories don't always serve who we're trying to become. A consistent habit breaks that loop. It allows us to step outside the narrative and simply observe. Not to judge, just to see. What you see in that mirror over time starts to change you. You begin to take responsibility for your choices, not in a harsh, self-critical way, but with maturity, with ownership. With ownership, you stop blaming your schedule, your circumstances, or other people. You start noticing where you have influence, where you have choice, where you can grow. The habit also reveals strength you forgot you had. You'll notice the moments you stayed calm instead of reacting. The times you chose alignment over approval. The ways you kept showing up when it would have been easier to quit. These small wins are easy to miss when life moves fast. But the habit slows things down just enough for you to notice. And that noticing builds confidence. Eventually, the habit becomes more than a tool. It becomes a relationship. You don't do it because you're chasing some end result. You do it because it reconnects you to yourself. It becomes a moment of truth in a day full of distractions. Pause where you remember who you are, what you care about, and how you want to live. It's not about perfection or performance. It's about presence. When a habit becomes a mirror, it stops being just a task on your checklist. It becomes a place where self-awareness is cultivated, where character is shaped, and where alignment is restored. The mirror doesn't lie, but it also doesn't judge. It simply reflects what is real. There's a tendency to romanticize change. We talk about breakthroughs as if they arrive out of nowhere. Sudden sparks of clarity. One big moment that shifts everything. But real change doesn't usually feel magical. It feels repetitive. It feels ordinary. It feels like showing up over and over again when no one's clapping and nothing dramatic is happening. What looks like confidence from the outside is often just practice on the inside. What looks like discipline is often just familiarity. The things people call willpower or talent are often just muscle memory. Small actions repeated until they become part of who you are. That's how transformation actually works. Not by force, but by familiarity. You do the habit once, and it's a choice. You do it a few times, and it's effort. But you do it long enough, and it becomes who you are. The resistance doesn't go away, but it gets quieter. The hesitation doesn't disappear. It doesn't disappear, but it no longer controls you. That's the power of building something slowly. Your body begins to remember. Your mind begins to trust. There's a kind of internal wiring that starts to form when you keep showing up. Even on the days when it feels inconvenient or pointless, especially on those days, that's where the muscle is built. Not physical muscle, mental, emotional, even spiritual muscle. You're not just repeating action. You're rehearsing identity. People often wait for motivation to return before they restart a habit. But those who grow the most don't wait to feel ready. They start. And in the starting, readiness catches up. The more you repeat a pattern, the more natural it becomes. The more natural it becomes. The brain doesn't need you to be inspired. It needs you to be consistent. That's how muscle memory works. Through signals. Through routine. It's easy to overestimate what can be done in a week and underestimate what's possible in a year of simple, steady action. Steady action. A few minutes of intentional stillness today may not seem like much, but done daily, it rewires how you think, how you react, how you see yourself. That's not magic. That's the result of deliberate repetition, creating internal structure. The beautiful thing is, once the muscle is there, it supports you when you're weak. When life gets overwhelming, your default settings matter. And if your default setting is clarity, reflection, alignment, then even in chaos, you return to something solid. Not because you thought about it, but because you practiced it. We admire those who are grounded under pressure, calm in conflict, present in distraction. But those qualities are almost never natural. They're trained. They're earned. They're earned. They're built the same way muscle is built, rep by rep, choice by choice, until one day you're no longer trying to become that person, because you already are.